Brightside Nation, what's going on? This is Mike Hanley. It's Wednesday, May 30th. Just wanted to check in tonight. There was something that really caught my eye, and the subject is in regards to just the African American community in the United States. And this is something that is absolutely a sensitive subject, but there's been so much talk about Candace Owens and Kanye West and this free thought movement that they've been leading, and just some of the things that have been put out on social media is really what I want to talk about today, because I think it's so extremely important. And I think so many people in the Black community and people across the United States are waking up to the manipulation essentially by the media. And it's this constant barrage that the media is throwing at people to divide us, to, in my personal opinion, to a lot of times keep the African American community down. And it is a scary thought, but a lot of what goes on and a lot of what's said essentially just doesn't add up, and it doesn't really make sense. And so what I really wanted to do today is just touch on some of these things that I think are so important and extremely important to the African American community. I was looking at a video that Candace Owens had tweeted out, and that was in regards to an African American student at Harvard University. And it really has to do with African Americans in the Democratic Party, and essentially most, if not all, but most of the African American community will vote Democrat. I believe it's somewhere in the 80%, if not more. And so what we've seen recently is Trump's approval among the African American community going up. I think he has like 22% approval rating. So maybe it's maybe down to about 78% of African Americans that are going to be voting Democrat, or voting either for Democrat or against Donald Trump in the coming election, presidential election, which is quite some ways away. But what I found so interesting is the student who came up, he talked about Black Lives Matter being funded by white liberals. And to me, that is so interesting that Black Lives Matter is funded predominantly by white liberals. And so what really are the intentions of the people that are funding this group? Is it to unite people, or is it to sow seeds of destruction? And there's no doubt in my mind, 110%, that the basis and the idea of Black Lives Mattering is a no-doubter. Absolutely, 110%. Couldn't say it any other way, that Black Lives Matter. Absolutely. I think where a lot of people struggle with not the concept of Black Lives Matter, I want to be very clear, because the idea and the concept of Black Lives Mattering is a no-doubter. I think it's the entity in and of itself, the group that has named themselves Black Lives Matter, and what are their intentions. And I think based on some of the disruptions that we've seen, I mean, we've seen marches for Black Lives Matter, people saying pigs in a blanket, fry them like bacon. I mean, that's essentially hoping that cops, they're talking about cops being pigs, are essentially fried, being killed. And so I understand the division between the African American community and law enforcement. I truly do, because there are a lot of things that happen with Black people and cops that cause distrust among the African American community. And I just wanted to acknowledge that, because there's no doubt that there are a lot of instances. I mean, and I can't speak specifically to each one, but we have instances like Trayvon Martin and Freddie Gray And I can't say one way or another what happened because there's a lot of misinformation that gets put out by the media. And I think, in all honesty, I think that's by design. And it's just extremely hurtful to the black community and to also law enforcement when there's so much misinformation. I think we saw that with Michael Brown in the Ferguson riots. There was hands up, don't shoot. Well, we came to find out that that was a farce and it was not true. Um, and it's so sad to see anyone's life being taken. It's just as sad to see the misinformation that's put out by the media to pin and divide blacks and law enforcement against one another. But I wanted to get back to the student at Harvard. One of the strongest comments that he made, he goes, "I'm off the plantation, bro. I'm off the plantation." And this was essentially an event put on by Turning Point USA, which is ran by Charlie Kirk and Candace Owens and others. But those were the two that were at the event. They were essentially had the platform and were on stage. And it was extremely eye-opening to me to see the response by Candace Owens. And she talks about that Democrats are extremely good when it comes to using linguistics. So they use euphemisms such as Planned Parenthood. And Candace Owens went on to say that, of course, we want Parenthood to be planned. And of course, Black Lives Matter. There's no doubt about this. But it's interesting at the same time that we say that Black Lives Matter, which they do, we also have Planned Parenthood killing around 800 African American babies a day via abortion. And that adds up 800 a day. Multiply that by 365, you have about 290,000 abortions performed by Planned Parenthood every single year. And the amount of money that Planned Parenthood receives from the federal government is an absolutely astonishing number. And I don't know exactly what that is. I want to say in the millions. So you have coming in one door, you have taxpayer dollars of the American citizens going into Planned Parenthood, and then you have mass amounts of money used to fund abortions, many of which are African American. So we have this situation where we're talking about Planned Parenthood, and then we're also talking about Black Lives Matter, but we're using tax dollars of the American citizens, both white, black, and Hispanic, and any other race that you can think of. We're using the tax dollars of the U.S. citizens to perform an ungodly number of abortions by Planned Parenthood on the African American community. And so what rang so true to me is we talk about it just not adding up, it just not making sense. So where does this figure in? Where is the idea that if Black Lives Matter so much, that we're aborting 290,000 African American babies every single year? I mean, it's just absolutely astonishing. And right now, it kind of gives me the chills in the worst way to even think about it. I mean, it's just gross. It's absolutely disgusting. And, people will sit here and have the argument, about abortion and all these different things. I'm not necessarily here to argue about abortion and exactly, it's the right of a woman or this or that. The way I look at it personally, this is just my personal opinion, is when I sit here and I think about abortion, I feel like it's the life and the potential that is taken away from a defenseless baby. I mean, and to me that is so sad because, yeah, they talk about the choice of a woman. Well, an unborn baby doesn't have that choice. And so it's not so much for me to sit up here and talk about the different sides of abortion and the argument. I'm just looking at it from the standpoint of what about that potential? All of these lives that we're taking, all of these unborn lives. What what exactly are we gaining from this? Are we just saying that, okay, because these babies aren't being born, that we're protecting them from a life stricken of poverty? Is that part of the argument? I look at it from a different perspective, a different lens, saying who, how do we know that the children that aren't being born? What if they're the next Einstein? What if they're the next Martin Luther King? What if they're the next, great athlete? Maybe the next LeBron James, for instance, Michael Jordan, you name it. I mean, just look at the plethora of absolutely amazing athletes that play in both the NFL and the NBA. And so, that's what's so troubling to me as an American citizen and somebody who sits here and really looks at, the the potential. And that's just something that I really wanted to touch on. I thought that was really important. But I also wanted to look at the bigger picture. And the bigger picture being, black families in inner city America. And I think the lack of family structure is one of the biggest things. The lack of a father figure in the home. And then I believe what happens is because the father isn't there as a male role model, we have youngsters that are looking for that father figure, someone to look up to. Now, of course, you have the mother, and there are so many amazing single moms, both black, white, no matter which way you look at it. I mean, there's so many amazing women, single moms who raise kids, and it's an incredible job that some of these women do with their children and the limited resources that they have. Um, but I think some of these youngsters, they'll go to school and they'll look for fellowship there. They'll go to in the neighborhood. They'll start, maybe hanging out with the wrong crowds. And I think these are the things. The basis of having that family structure is so important, especially to help the vicious cycle that some in the African American community are in, because if there's no family structure and they aren't pushed to get an education, and if they're not able to get a good education because of poor schooling in the inner city schools, on top of that, it's going to be difficult for them to get a job. And then if they're unable to get a job, are they going to turn to um, the wrong things, being gangs or violence, drugs? These are really the concerns that are paramount. They're absolutely paramount in addressing what is going on with the black community. And someone being white, I can't speak to all these different things, and I understand that. But I also think these issues are important to talk about. I also think that there needs to be greater dialogue between the white community and the black community, and I think it's an absolutely healthy thing. There are many people who may say this video that I'm talking down to black people. In no way whatsoever is that my intention. I don't mean to come off that way if I do. But I really think that it's just absolutely imperative to sit down and talk about these things, and how the white community can help the black community, and we can come together and strengthen the community, and really just build a good foundation moving forward for our country. Um, Earlier, I had mentioned schools, and we talk about students going to school. Are they given the proper clothing in terms of, are they staying warm enough in the wintertime? Are they getting proper meals? Are they coming to school hungry? Do they not even have the energy when they come to school to learn? Can they see the board? I mean, think about how many students probably don't have the necessary resources to go to a doctor or an eye doctor to see whether or not they have astigmatism, or they have some type of issue with their eyes that prevents them from um, seeing the board or reading a book. There are probably so many students out there that are just pushed to the side. Oh, he can't read or she can't read. Or maybe she can't read because she can't see it. She can't see properly, or he can't see properly. I mean, these are just the little things that so many people don't think about. Or maybe the educators just don't have the time. Maybe they're too busy babysitting in schools because there's a lot of violence in the schools. And so, um, I think getting that education is such an important basis, and removing some of these barriers of making sure that basic needs are met. And if these basic needs are met, then we're removing the barriers that prevent learning. And if we go ahead and do that, getting that education is absolutely essential for any American, regardless of race, color, or creed. Um, and so, we continue to see, some of the different things that go on in politics, and I think more and more people are starting to realize that maybe it's not as it seems. Maybe the people that are talking to the black community, that are telling the black community that certain groups are against them and that these people are racist, because they have different views. And I think that goes back to the media. I think there are so many ways in which the media manipulates groups of people to divide themselves. And once there's division, it makes it very difficult to have any type of dialogue and communication. And so, these are just some of the issues that I wanted to really touch on today. I mean, I look at what is going on with the president meeting with Kim Kardashian today, and then also Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump have been working on prison reform. And so I think it was a bill signed by, I want to say George W. Bush, the first Bush president. And there was a time in which there was this law signed, and the law made prison sentence stronger against drug offenders. And so when this law was signed against the drug offenders, there was a period of time, I think after the 1980s until now, that there has been mass incarceration of all types of people, and many African American people in our prison systems. And I think this goes back to the privatization of jails and prisons. So basically what happened is, rather than the federal government running the prisons, there was a privatization of these jails and prisons that essentially created almost like a quota. So they were arresting a lot of these people, and essentially a whole sector of business was created, and that was jails and prisons. Now, there's more information that I need to pull up on this, but I think it's important to note that it was essentially an industry that was created through mass incarceration. And this is something that Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump have been working on, and also Kim Kardashian. And I want to show you a couple things right here in regards to some of the meetings and some of the things that they're trying to do. So right here, there's a little tweet that talks about some of the steps that are being taken, and it was a retweet by Ivanka Trump, and some of the different practices that have been put in place, and also the things that are leading to this type of mass incarceration and imprisonment of some fragile communities. It talks about in these fragile communities that more people are being incarcerated and the reasons why they're being incarcerated, whether it be violence and drugs and some of the underlying things that happen. So rather than just taking someone and putting them in prison for an extended period of time, we're looking at different types of rehabilitation. And I mean, just from a humanity standpoint, it's a great idea, and I think that's absolutely something that we need to do. I think from an economic and a government standpoint, and just as a U.S. citizen, just imagine the amount of money and the amount of tax dollars that are going into essentially holding somebody up for their entire life. I mean, just the cost alone. So not only are we looking at someone's life and the life that they potentially could have, and maybe some rehabilitation, but also the amount of tax dollars that is put forth to put somebody up for life. And I mean, there's a lot of different things that come into play here, and I realize that, I recognize that, but I think it's important to look at this as something, that can happen in prison reform rather than having this mass privatization of jails and prisons, looking at it from a different perspective, because there's no reason why people shouldn't get second, third, and fourth chances, dependent upon their crimes. And I think as we see in our judicial system, there are people with, mass amounts of money who are able to essentially get off because they have connections, they can get the right lawyer. And then you see others who are not so fortunate, who have, less resources, less money, and they can't get that lawyer, they can't get the proper representation. And that once they're in the legal system, once they're in jail, then there's probation if they violate probation, etc. Now, I understand that it comes up to each individual person, but at the same time, there's definitely some inadequacies in terms of the representation that someone may get when they pay for a high-powered lawyer. People who know, let's say, the DA, the district attorney, to someone who is essentially just Joe Schmo and doesn't have that type of representation or type of connections, and they're fighting an uphill battle in the judicial system. So, I think this is also a really big issue that hits home for many in the Black community, and that was just something that I thought was very important to cover, especially in regards to some of the commentary and discussion that I had earlier in this video. So, thanks so much for tuning in tonight. Please leave any comments, questions, concerns. Any fact checking is surely appreciated. Thank you so much for tuning in, Right Side Nation. This is Mike Hanley with RightSideNews.com. We're on the right side. Thank you.